Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision.
Oh, absolutely. It feels almost like engineering.
Right, exactly. I mean, you fall off a ladder, you break your arm, and you get an X-ray.
Yeah.
And the doctor just points at that stark, jagged white line across the bone on the screen and says, there it is. That is the problem.
Because it's entirely binary. Like the bone is broken or it isn't.
Right.
And that clarity is incredibly comforting. I mean, as a species, we are deeply addicted to things being visible, measurable, and easily categorized into these neat little boxes.
We really are. But then, you step into the world of predicting the future, whether we're talking about global economics or historical shifts, or honestly, just the trajectory of your own personal life, and that X-ray machine is completely broken.
Oh, it's shattered.
Yeah. We are legally blind, yet we walk around acting like we have 20/20 vision. Like we're looking at a predictive landscape that isn't just murky, it is terrifyingly unpredictable.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. We're essentially operating with a map that just doesn't actually match the territory we're standing on.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today for this deep dive is incredibly ambitious.
It really is.
We are digging into a set of ideas rooted in the concept of the Black Swan that will fundamentally shatter the way you view uncertainty, risk, and the future.
Prepare to have your worldview completely dismantled.
Seriously. We are going right for the throat of conventional social science, classical economics, and really the very wiring of human psychology.
Yeah, because the core argument we're exploring today is that our world is entirely dominated by the extreme, the unknown, and the highly improbable.
Right. And yet, what do we spend literally all our time doing?
We obsess over the known, the average, the quote-unquote normal.
Exactly. We obsess over the normal.
And, the implications of that obsession are genuinely staggering. Because if you follow the logical through line of these concepts, you start to realize something deeply unsettling. Well, a lot of what we consider staying informed, like religiously reading the daily newspaper or, watching financial news networks or studying historical trends, it might actually be actively decreasing your understanding of how the world really works.
Wow. So trying to stay informed makes you less informed.
Yeah, by the end of this deep dive, you'll see why. It gives you a false sense of security. It makes you confident about a reality that simply does not exist.
Wow, that is just wild to think about. So to understand exactly how we've blinded ourselves, we kind of have to go back to the literal origin of the term we are dissecting today.
We have to talk about birds.
We do.
Yeah.
Specifically swans. I mean, for millennia, across the entirety of the old world, there was this absolute, unassailable belief that all swans were white.
And we really need to emphasize the word unassailable here. This was not just a passing hunch.
Right. It wasn't just, oh, I haven't seen one today.
No, this was a foundational assumption of human knowledge.
Yeah.
It was backed by millions upon millions of confirmatory sightings over thousands of years.
Yeah.
Every single piece of empirical evidence human beings in Europe, Asia, and Africa had ever gathered pointed to one singular, undeniable fact. Swans are white.
It was treated almost like a law of physics. Like gravity.
Exactly. Right up until the late 17th century when explorers sailed to Australia.
Right. They sail down there, they land in Western Australia, and what do they see?
They see a black swan.
Just gliding around.
Yeah. Now, the Roman poet Juvenal had actually used the phrase, a bird as rare as the black swan, centuries before this.
Oh, really? So the term existed?
It did, but he used it as a metaphor for an absolute impossibility, for something that fundamentally could not exist in reality.
But then, boom, there it is, gliding across a river in Australia.
Exactly. And the profound significance here, it isn't about ornithology or birdwatching.
No, of course not.
It's about the fragility of human knowledge. I mean, one single observation of a rather ordinary, if differently colored bird, completely and instantaneously invalidated a general rule that had been derived from millennia of exhaustive evidence. Thousands of years of evidence, wiped out in a second.
Yes. It exposes a severe structural limitation in our ability to learn from experience.
And the ideas we are diving into today, they push this way past a neat little philosophical puzzle about waterfowl.
Way past it.
We are talking about the black swan as a capitalized concept, an event.
Right?
And it's defined by a very specific three-part criteria, a triplet of the extreme.
So let's break down that triplet.
Yeah, the first criterion is rarity. It has to be an absolute outlier.
Meaning it lies completely outside the realm of regular expectations. Nothing in the past, points to its possibility.
It is the ultimate blank spot on the map.
If you are tracking data on a graph, this event doesn't just fall outside the bell curve. It exists in a completely different dimension of measurement.
Exactly. Then we have the second criterion, which is extreme impact.
Because it's not just some strange anomaly that we can comfortably ignore.
Right. It carries massive consequences. It rewrites history, it topples societies, or it completely upends your personal life. Yeah, the impact is unavoidable.
But it's the third criterion that I think is the most insidious and honestly the most dangerous. Retrospective predictability.
What's fascinating here is this psychological mechanism behind that third point.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, in spite of the event's outlier status, right, and in spite of the fact that absolutely no one saw it coming, human nature forces us to concoct elaborate explanations for its occurrence after the fact.
We pretend we knew it all along.
Exactly. We look back, we connect the dots in reverse, and we make the event seem completely explainable and predictable.
We tell ourselves, oh, of course that happened. The signs were all there.
Even though in the moment, they absolutely were.
But why do we do that? Why do we lie to ourselves so consistently about this stuff?
Because the alternative is psychologically terrifying.
How so?
Admitting that we are at the mercy of total randomness, that a massive, life-altering event can just drop out of a clear blue sky for no logical reason, that induces profound anxiety.
I mean, yeah, that is a scary thought.
We just cannot handle the concept of pure chaos. So our brains act as these narrative generation machines.
We invent a story to feel safe.
Precisely. We force neat, logical stories onto random events just to feel safe in our beds at night. We have to believe someone is driving the bus, even if it's headed off a cliff.
I hear that, but I want to push back on this whole premise for a second. And I want you, listening, to really think about this triplet. Rarity, extreme impact, retrospective predictability.
Okay, lay it on me.
If these events are, by definition, extreme outliers, why should they be the focal point of our understanding of the world?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Shouldn't we be studying the rule rather than the exception? Look at medicine. If I want to understand human cardiology, I study thousands of normal, healthy heartbeats. I don't base my entire understanding of the cardiovascular system on one bizarre 1 in a billion genetic mutation, right? We study the average to understand the whole.
And that is exactly the conventional wisdom that these ideas are attempting to completely tear down.
Oh, really? My analogy is busted.
Well, if we were purely physical machines operating in a closed system, your heartbeat analogy would be absolutely perfect.
But we aren't.
Right. We are talking about human history, economics, and social dynamics. And the core argument here is that the rules of the game have changed.
Changed how?
Since human beings left the Pleistocene era, about 10 millennia ago, the effect of these rare extreme events has been steadily increasing.
Okay.
And when we hit the Industrial Revolution, that effect started accelerating exponentially. The world became hyper-connected and vastly more complicated.
So the environment itself shifted out from under us.
Entirely. So to answer your question, we shouldn't study the rule because the rule doesn't drive history anymore.
Wait, it doesn't?
No. A very, very small number of extreme, unforeseeable black swans explain almost everything of significance in our modern world.
Literally everything.
Yeah. The success of world-changing ideas, the sudden explosion of new religions, the dynamics of global wars, the catastrophic failures of financial markets, even the pivotal moments of your own personal life. The ordinary, average events that we study in school and read about in the newspaper.
The stuff we think is the rule.
Exactly. They are increasingly inconsequential. They are just background noise.
Okay, that is a massive claim to swallow. Because if black swans are the primary drivers of history, the natural next question is blindingly obvious.
Which is?
Why do our leaders, our forecasters, our highly paid experts consistently fail to see them coming? Why do we have thousands of think tanks and economic forums predicting the exact opposite of what actually happens?
Let's do a thought experiment to really ground this.
Okay, I love a good thought experiment.
Imagine you are standing on the eve of the year 1914. It is New Year's Eve, 1913.
Okay, I'm picturing it. The height of the Edwardian era.
Yeah.
We're in some grand ballroom in London or Vienna. Champagne is flowing.
People are dancing.
Yeah, global trade is booming. People genuinely believe large-scale war is a thing of the past because our economies are just too intertwined.
Exactly. The atmosphere is one of supreme confidence and rational progress. Now, using only the ordinary knowledge available to you at that precise moment in 1913.
No cheating.
Right, without cheating, without using the hindsight your high school history teacher drilled into your head, could you have predicted what the 20th century was about to become?
Not a chance.
Could you have mapped out the trench warfare of World War I?
Absolutely not. I mean, the leading military minds of the time thought the next conflict would be a quick, cavalry-based skirmish lasting a few weeks.
Right, they thought everyone would be home by Christmas. What about the rise of a dictator like Hitler?
Well,
What about the subsequent Cold War and then the precipitous, completely unexpected demise of the Soviet bloc decades later?
no, nobody saw that collapse coming the way it did.
What about the rise of Islamic fundamentalism? What about the invention and completely unchecked spread of the internet?
Definitely not the internet.
The sudden stock market crash of 1987? You couldn't predict any of it.
Literally none of it.
Even on a cultural level, fads, epidemics, fashions, entirely new genres of art, they all follow these extreme, unpredictable dynamics.
So it's not just wars and economics.
No, literally everything of significance in our modern era qualifies as an unforeseeable outlier. Yet our institutions act as if this phenomenon simply doesn't exist.
And it's not just everyday people walking around with this blind spot. I mean, the ideas we're exploring are absolutely brutal toward professional social scientists and financial analysts.
Oh, they are eviscerated.
Right, because for over a century, entire industries have operated under the false, dangerous belief that their statistical tools can somehow measure and contain uncertainty.
It's particularly glaring in finance and economics. If you go ask a high-powered portfolio manager, someone managing billions of dollars in retirement funds for their definition of risk, they're going to hand you a highly complex mathematical model.
Filled with equations we can't read.
Exactly. But if you look closely at that model, you'll find that it explicitly excludes the possibility of extreme, unpredictable outliers.
Wait, what?
Yes. It is designed to measure the normal fluctuations of the market, not the catastrophic, unprecedented crashes.
But wait, isn't the catastrophic crash the exact and honestly only thing I actually need the risk manager to protect me from? That's madness.
It is entirely madness. It means their predictions have absolutely no better value for assessing total, real-world risks than astrology.
Astrology. You're comparing Wall Street to a horoscope.
Practically, yes. But they managed to dress up this intellectual fraud with sophisticated jargon and complicated mathematics. It looks like science, so we trust it.
It feels like we're driving a car down a winding mountain road, and the driver is only looking in the rearview mirror to see where we've been.
So it's a great analogy.
But worse than that, we've actually painted a picture of a straight, safe road ahead, right on the windshield, and we're telling ourselves we have total vision of the future.
Yeah, we are completely delusional.
And the material we're looking at today refers to these professionals as empty suits.
I love that term, empty suits.
They're people who genuinely believe they are experts. But if you actually track their empirical record of predictions, they know no more about the future of their subject matter than a random person pulled off the street.
Literally, a coin flip would be as accurate.
Yeah. Their actual skill set has nothing to do with prediction.
So what are they good at then?
They're just much better at narrating. They possess a slicker vocabulary. They are highly skilled at smoking you with complicated mathematical models that you don't understand, which forces you to defer to their authority.
And quite frankly, they're more likely to wear an expensive tie and sit in an impressive office.
It's darkly funny, but it's also terrifying when you look at the stakes. Because we aren't just talking about losing a few bucks in your 401k.
No, we are talking about global policy.
Right. Our cumulative prediction errors for political and economic events are so massive and so consistent that engaging in deadly conflicts or restructuring global economies based on these forecasts is compared to a child playing with a chemistry kit.
That is a chilling image.
We trigger extreme events through our aggressive ignorance. We act with absolute certainty, completely blind to the randomness we are unleashing.
We constantly focus on the pennies while ignoring the dollars.
Exactly.
We build entire academic disciplines to study the minutiae, the daily predictable fluctuations of society, while completely ignoring the massive tectonic shifts that actually define our era.
Right, the stuff that actually matters.
And acknowledging this massive failure in our predictive models requires a profound, really uncomfortable shift in how we view knowledge itself.
How so?
Because if the models are fundamentally broken, we run into a very strange paradox regarding what we know versus what we don't know.
Oh, let's dive into that, because this is where the logic takes a sharp left turn into something totally counterintuitive.
Yeah, buckle up for this one.
The concept introduced here is anti-knowledge. If we follow the logic of the extreme outlier, it dictates that what you don't know is vastly more important than what you do know. In fact, many catastrophic events are caused, or at least severely exacerbated, precisely because they're unexpected.
This is a crucial mechanism to understand. Let's look at the strategic example provided in our source material, the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001.
Okay.
Now, we are simply outlining the logical argument being made regarding strategic vulnerabilities here. The proposition is this: if the risk of that specific, unprecedented style of attack had been reasonably conceivable on September 10th, it fundamentally would not have happened.
Wait, you're losing me a bit. How can not knowing something be the primary driver of the event?
Think about it.
Like if I'm flying a plane, knowing exactly where the mountain is prevents me from crashing. Knowledge is safety, isn't it?
When you are dealing with physical laws like a mountain and an airplane, yes. The mountain doesn't change its behavior based on what you know.
Right, the mountain doesn't care if I'm looking at it.
Exactly. But when you are dealing with strategic human interaction, the rules completely invert.
Okay, and listen.
If the attack had been expected on September 10th, massive defensive measures would have been taken. Fighter planes would have been patrolling the skies. Commercial cockpit doors would have been heavily fortified and locked, and the specific operation would have been thwarted before it even began.
So the element of surprise was the only reason it succeeded.
Something else might have happened on a different day, but that specific event would not have taken place.
I see. So the event was only possible entirely because it was housed in the realm of the unknown. It happened precisely because it was not supposed to happen.
Exactly. And this creates a bizarre paradox of defense. Whatever you come to know, for instance, if you establish that a specific landmark in New York is an easy, highly visible target, that knowledge may become entirely inconsequential if your enemy also knows that you know it.
Wow. Because they just won't attack there anymore.
Right. They simply adapt and look for the vulnerability you haven't thought of yet. In this kind of strategic game, your codified knowledge is constantly being rendered useless.
And this asymmetry doesn't just apply to terrorism or human adversaries, right? It applies to our vulnerability to natural disasters, too.
Absolutely.
Look at the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, a horrific tragedy. But if an event of that magnitude in that specific location had been expected, the affected areas would have been evacuated.
People wouldn't have been on the beach.
Coastal early warning systems would have been funded and operational. The geographical impact would have been the same. The water still hits the shore, but the human damage wouldn't have been.
It is the unexpectedness, the complete lack of prior knowledge that creates the massive, catastrophic human toll.
Right. But we need to balance the ledger here, because this asymmetry of the unknown doesn't just apply to disasters and catastrophes.
No, it applies equally to positive breakthroughs.
Think about human innovation. Think about the business world. The example used here is the restaurant industry.
Oh, this is a great example.
If there were a known, obvious, completely risk-free secret recipe to making a killing in the restaurant business, the person next door would have already implemented it.
It would be widely copied almost immediately.
Right. The market would saturate and the returns would drop to zero. It would become generic.
Exactly. If the recipe for success is known, it actually ceases to be a recipe for success.
That's the paradox. The next massive billion-dollar success in the restaurant industry, or the software business, or publishing, must be an idea that is not easily conceived by the current population.
It has to be an outlier. It has to sit at a far distance from current expectations.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I want to bring this down from the ivory tower and apply it directly to you, the listener.
Yeah, let's make it personal.
Look at your own existence right now. Take an inventory. Count the truly significant events, the massive technological or cultural changes that have taken place since you were born.
Think of the iPhone, the internet, social media.
How many of those arrived exactly on a schedule that was predicted by experts?
Almost zero.
Now look even closer at your own personal timeline. Think about the day you met your partner, or the completely random conversation that led you to your current profession.
Or a sudden, shocking betrayal by a friend.
Right. Or a completely unexpected financial windfall, or a sudden, devastating impoverishment. When you look back at the actual architecture of your life, how often did those profound trajectory-altering events occur according to a neat 5-year plan you wrote down in a notebook?
They don't. They never do.
Never.
The most important moments of our lives are governed by serendipity, by chaos, and by the unknown. And this personal reality scales up to the macro level.
How so?
It brings up a fascinating critique of classical economic thinkers. The concepts we are discussing challenge both sides of the traditional economic aisle, pointing out fundamental flaws in the followers of Karl Marx and Adam Smith alike.
Oh, wow. So nobody is safe.
Nobody. The core argument here is that robust systems and free markets do not actually work because they perfectly reward skill or because they execute brilliant top-down centralized planning.
So why do they work? They work because they allow people to aggressively tinker.
Yes. They work because they create an environment where individuals can engage in massive amounts of trial and error. Tinkering. The most successful strategy for discoverers, inventors, and entrepreneurs isn't to sit in a boardroom for 5 years and draw up a perfect, rigid, 30-year plan.
Because the plan is always wrong anyway.
Exactly. It's to realize that your plan is probably wrong and instead focus on maximum tinkering. You have to put yourself out there constantly experimenting so you are in a position to recognize and capitalize on highly improbable opportunities when they randomly present themselves.
So you don't predict the positive black swan.
You can't.
You just set yourself up to catch it by maximizing your exposure to the unknown.
Exactly. You increase your surface area for luck.
Okay, let me pause you right there. Because if tinkering, adapting to chaos, and embracing the unknown is so clearly the superior strategy, if all of human history and our own personal lives point to the fact that planning is mostly an illusion, why is human society so obsessed with rigid, precise plans?
It's a great question.
Why do we instinctively hate the unknown so much that we build massive bureaucratic structures just to pretend it doesn't exist?
To answer that, we have to look under the hood of our own biology. It really comes down to the evolutionary architecture of our minds.
We're wired this way.
Yes, we suffer from a fundamental, hardwired cognitive impediment. We have an excessive, obsessive focus on what we do know at the expense of what we don't.
We cling to the known.
As a species, we have an overwhelming tendency to learn the precise, specific facts of an event rather than the general abstract rules behind it.
There is an incredibly illustrative historical example of this. Think back to France in the years immediately following World War I.
The Maginot Line.
Exactly. The French military leadership were excellent students of history. They studied the German invasion of 1914 meticulously.
They did their homework.
They really did. And they learned a very precise, specific lesson from it. They looked at the exact route the German army took, and they poured massive national resources into building the Maginot Line, an impenetrable, state-of-the-art fortified wall stretching right along that specific geographical border.
They prepared perfectly for the previous war.
Right. And what happened when Hitler invaded decades later?
Well, the German mechanized units simply drove through the Ardennes forest and went almost effortlessly right around the wall.
They literally just drove around it. The French military planners were entirely too practical, too exceedingly focused on precise historical data for their own safety.
Yeah, they learned the facts of the previous invasion, but they utterly failed to learn the rules of modern fluid warfare.
It's the ultimate failure of imagination. We don't learn what you might call meta rules, like the overarching rule that we, as human beings, have a terrible tendency not to learn the rules.
It's quite ironic, really.
We just memorize facts. We crave the concrete, and we actively scorn the abstract.
And if we connect this cognitive blind spot to the bigger picture, we arrive at a concept known as Platonicity.
Named after the ancient Greek philosopher Plato.
Exactly. Platonicity is our deeply ingrained human tendency to mistake the map for the territory. Think about Plato's theory of forms.
Right, the ideal version of things.
We absolutely love pure, well-defined ideas. We love perfect triangles, crisp social categories, utopian political theories, and neat symmetrical blueprints.
Because a perfectly drawn triangle on a chalkboard makes sense. It's orderly, it's safe.
It is safe. But when these elegant, pure objects inhabit our minds, we begin to privilege them over the messier, less tractable, highly complex structures of actual reality.
The territory.
Yes, a real mountain is jagged, unpredictable, and infinitely complex, but our brains want to treat it like a simple, neat triangle because it's easier to process. We desperately want the real world to fit into the clean rows and columns of an Excel spreadsheet.
Platonicity makes us arrogant. It makes us genuinely believe we understand the mechanics of the world far more than we actually do.
Yes, it creates a dangerous overconfidence.
Now, to be fair, models, maps, and intellectual theories aren't always useless. They have utility. But they are inedibly wrong in specific, unpredictable applications.
You never know beforehand exactly where the map is going to diverge from the territory.
Right. And when it does diverge, the mistakes don't just result in a slight miscalculation, they lead to catastrophic consequences. Relying on these rigid models is like taking a highly effective medicine that occasionally, without any warning, carries incredibly severe lethal side effects.
And that catastrophic divergence leads us to the concept of the protonic fold.
The Platonic fold, what is that exactly?
You can picture it as an explosive, volatile boundary line. It is the exact point where our neat, mathematically perfect Platonic mindset violently crashes into the messy, chaotic reality of the real world.
Oh man, so it's the friction point.
It's the hidden gap between what you actually know and what you arrogantly think you know. And that gap, that friction point at the Platonic fold, is the exact birthplace of the Black Swan.
Which brings us to the ultimate weapon of the empty suits we talked about earlier. The tool they use to convince us they've conquered the unknown.
Ah, yes.
It's referred to here as the great intellectual fraud. The GIF.
The bell curve.
Let's really break this down, because the bell curve is treated like absolute gospel in academia and finance. How does it actually work? And why is it a fraud when applied to the real world?
Think about what the bell curve, the normal distribution, actually measures. Let's say you take 1,000 randomly selected people and put them in a stadium.
Okay, got my 1,000 people.
You calculate their average weight. It's maybe 160 pounds. Now, introduce the heaviest human being alive into that stadium, someone who weighs, say, 1,000 pounds. What happens to the average weight of the group?
Well, it barely moves. I mean, one massive outlier can't significantly shift the average of 1,000 people. The bulk of the data stays right in the middle, in the bell of the curve.
Exactly. That is a domain we can call mediocristin.
Mediocristin.
In mediocristin, physical constraints keep outliers in check.
Because nobody can weigh 10,000 pounds.
Right. Now let's look at a different domain, which we'll call extremistan. Let's measure wealth instead of weight.
Okay, same stadium.
Same stadium. You take those same 1,000 people and calculate their average net worth. Let's say it's $50,000. Now, Bill Gates walks into the stadium.
Oh, wow. What happens to the average?
Exactly. Completely explodes. Suddenly, the average net worth in that stadium is over $100 million.
One single outlier completely invalidates all the other data points combined.
Precisely. In extremistan, the outlier dictates everything. The problem, the great intellectual fraud, is that our experts, our economists, and our social scientists take the mathematics of weight, the bell curve, and they aggressively apply it to the mathematics of wealth, society, and human behavior.
They use the wrong tool for the job.
They use tools designed for mediocristin to measure the volatile realities of extremistan. The bell curve fundamentally ignores large deviations.
The math literally cannot handle them.
Right, so it assumes they are so rare they can be completely ignored. Yet this flawed mathematical tool is used by entire global industries, giving us a wildly false confidence that we have successfully tamed uncertainty.
But why? I just don't get why, if the math is so clearly mismatched to reality, our brains let us get away with this. Why are we so desperate for the map to be the territory?
It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question about human evolution.
Okay.
What are our minds actually made for? Because it looks very much like we are operating a complex machine with the wrong user's manual.
We're glitching.
Yeah, our brains do not seem fundamentally designed for deep introspection, for calculating probability, or for understanding abstract randomness. Think about the environment we evolved in. Imagine two of our ancient hominid ancestors out on the savannah.
Okay, the classic evolutionary thought experiment. Let's hear it.
The first ancestor is a deep thinker. He's introspective, he sees the grass rustle, and he stops to ponder the counterfactuals.
He's doing the math.
He thinks, well, the rustling could be the wind, or a mouse, or a lion. Let's calculate the probability distribution based on the bell curve of past rustling events.
Sounds like a smart guy.
Well, while he's doing that complex math, a lion jumps out and eats him.
Ah, his genes are removed from the pool.
Exactly. Now look at the second ancestor. He is non-thinking. He operates purely on rapid heuristics. He sees the grass rustle, he instantly assumes lion, and he runs up a tree.
No math involved.
None. He doesn't do the math. He might be wrong 99 times out of 100, it was just the wind. But on the 100th time, he survives. He lives to pass on his genes.
And that fast-reacting, non-thinking survivor is our direct cousin.
Yes. Deep, abstract thinking is incredibly time-consuming, and it is a massive drain on caloric energy. For more than 100 million years as mammals, survival depended on instantaneous reaction, not contemplation.
So we default to lazy, crisp mental constructs like the bell curve or the stereotype because our biology violently dictates it.
We are hardwired for it.
There's an amazing historical parallel used to illustrate this inability to grasp the invisible and the abstract. It goes back to the 1st century, right at the beginning of the Jewish revolt against the Romans.
This is a fascinating story.
The Roman Empire was incredibly powerful, but philosophically, they were very literal. They wanted to put a physical statue of their emperor, Caligula, inside the Jewish temple in Jerusalem.
A literal statue.
Right, and in exchange, they offered to place a statue of the Jewish god, Yahweh, in the Roman temples. It was meant to be a straightforward diplomatic trade of concrete symbols.
A physical exchange.
Exactly. But the Romans fundamentally lacked the conceptual framework to understand that the Jewish concept of God at that time was entirely abstract.
It couldn't be represented.
Right. It was an all-embracing, infinite entity that had absolutely no anthropomorphic human representation. You couldn't carve it out of marble. It defied physical or symbolic representation entirely.
To the Romans, this was baffling.
If you can't see it, if you can't sculpt it, how can it exist?
And the argument here is that we are doing the exact same thing today. The Romans couldn't handle an invisible God, and we can't handle invisible abstract uncertainty.
So what do? We try to commoditize it?
Yeah.
We try to force uncertainty into a neat little box, and we slap a label on it called risk management. We build incredibly complex mathematical statues of uncertainty using the bell curve, and we worship them, genuinely believing we have captured and contained the unknown.
That is precisely the trap. We take an abstract void, the unknown, and we use the vocabulary of concrete knowledge to describe it.
Which doesn't work.
No, we turn it into what is called a nerdified field of study. But the unknown is the exact opposite of knowledge. It is the literal lack of knowledge. You cannot measure a vacuum using a ruler.
Right.
And this isn't just an abstract philosophical problem. This inability to comprehend the unseen doesn't just result in bad math on Wall Street. The implications take a very dark, deeply human turn.
Yeah, this part hit me hard.
Because this cognitive blindness results in a profound, vicious, and pervasive societal injustice.
Yes, this is where the theory really hits the pavement for me. It's about what is referred to as a new kind of ingratitude. And exploring this really exposed a massive blind spot in my own thinking.
It's about the tragedy of the silent hero.
Exactly, because whenever we think of people mistreated by history, our minds usually go to the visible outcasts, right? We think of the starving artists, the visionaries like Edgar Allan Poe or Vincent van Gogh.
Geniuses who were scorned, impoverished, and ignored by society while they were alive, only to be worshipped as visionaries after they died.
Right. But there is a far more deeply mistreated category of human beings. The heroes who actively saved our lives, who successfully helped us avoid massive disasters, but who left absolutely no physical traces of their heroism behind.
Because they were successful in their prevention, the event never happened. Therefore, there is no evidence of their triumph.
Exactly. It's an invisible victory.
Even they themselves might not fully realize they were heroes because the catastrophe remained invisible.
To really drive this home, there's an incredible thought experiment I want us to walk through. I want you, the listener, to really picture this individual. Let's create a character and call him Joe Smith.
Okay, Joe Smith.
Joe is a junior legislator in the United States government. It's the year 2001. Now, Joe is incredibly rare. He possesses a unique combination of courage, political influence, sharp intellect, and profound vision.
A unicorn politician.
Basically. And against all odds, fighting massive lobbying efforts, he manages to pass a sweeping aviation security law. It goes into universal effect on September 10th, 2001.
Okay, setting the stage. And let's be clear about what this law entails. It mandates continuously locked, heavily armored, bulletproof doors in every single commercial airplane cockpit.
Right.
And it forces this massive retrofit at an incredibly high financial cost to an airline industry that is already struggling to maintain profit margins.
Which they would obviously fight tooth and nail.
Again.
And obviously, the premise acknowledges that finding a legislator with that much unyielding vision and courage is practically science fiction, but stick with the thought experiment.
We'll play along.
So Joe Smith wins the fight. The law is enacted, the doors are installed, the sun rises on September 11th, 2001. The hijackers board the planes, but the event doesn't happen.
Because of the doors.
Exactly. The locked armored doors fulfill their exact purpose. The planes cannot be taken over, the towers do not fall, The disaster is completely 100% avoided.
It's a miracle.
So we have to ask, what is Joe Smith's reward for unilaterally saving thousands of lives and completely altering the geopolitical trajectory of the 21st century?
His reward is absolute misery.
He gets nothing.
Nothing. There are no ticker tape parades. He gets no bronze statues in public squares. Years later, he doesn't even warrant a minor footnote in his local newspaper's obituary section.
In fact, his life is ruined, isn't it?
Entirely. The airline personnel and pilot unions despise him because the new security protocols complicated their daily routines.
They just see it as red tape.
Right. The airline executives and shareholders actively hate him for the massive financial drain his law imposed on their companies.
Because to them, he solved a problem that never existed.
Exactly. The general public looks at this astronomical expenditure of tax dollars and corporate resources for a supposed threat that seemingly never existed, and they view him as a paranoid nuisance. He is voted out of office in the next election cycle for squandering resources.
His obituary literally just reads, Joe Smith, former legislator, died of complications of liver disease. That's his tragic end.
It's heartbreaking.
He retires completely depressed, ostracized by his peers, feeling like an absolute failure. He dies with the overwhelming impression of having done nothing useful with his life.
And the cruelty of this goes all the way down to his biology.
How do you mean?
Well, because the event never happened, he never receives the external validation from society that triggers the serotonin kick in his brain. His own hormonal system conspires against him. He feels like a failure because society treats him like one.
Man, this thought experiment forces us to confront a brutal reality about how human society distributes its rewards. Because let's look at the flip side. Let's look at who did get the recognition, the praise, and the massive financial rewards in the actual aftermath of the real events of 9/11.
Oh, this is revealing.
Society didn't reward the people who tried to prevent it. Society rewarded the people you saw on television during the cleanup, the people who were visible in the rubble.
The treatment, not the prevention.
The example highlighted here is Richard Grasso, who was the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange at the time. In the aftermath of the attacks, he received an astronomical bonus, the equivalent of thousands of average worker salaries, essentially, for his contribution to the recovery.
And what was his grand, heroic contribution?
He was physically present to ring the opening bell on television when the stock market finally reopened.
Wow.
That was his highly compensated heroism, being a visible symbol of resilience on a broadcast screen.
Television and visual media in general acts as the ultimate carrier of unfairness.
Carrier of unfairness, that's a powerful phrase.
It is a major driving cause of our collective blindness to black swans. A camera can only film what happens. It cannot film an alternate timeline where a disaster was prevented.
It only shows the visible, the dramatic, the explosive aftermath.
By its very nature, media entirely erases the silent heroes of prevention from our cultural memory.
It is a massive structural reversal of basic logic. I mean, we all know the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Logically, we understand that preventing a disease is better than treating it.
But societally, we only glorify the treatment.
Always. We worship the surgeon who performs a miraculous 12-hour operation to cut out a tumor, but we entirely ignore the public health official who fought to ban the toxic chemical that causes the tumor in the first place.
Ask yourself, who actually gets rewarded in our political and economic systems? Do we build statues for the central banker who sees a housing bubble forming, raises interest rates, and quietly avoids a catastrophic global recession?
No, we fire them for slowing down economic growth.
Exactly. The one who gets the book deals and the accolades is the central banker who comes in after the crash, prints trillions of dollars to correct their predecessor's faults, and happens to be standing at the podium during the inevitable recovery.
Who is considered more historically significant? The brilliant diplomat who tirelessly negotiates behind closed doors and successfully avoids a massive bloody conflict. Or the aggressive politician who blunders into a devastating war but is lucky enough to eventually win it.
We endlessly glorify the people who leave their names etched in blood in our history books.
Completely at the expense of the silent sentinels whom those history books are silent about. The conclusion here is profoundly cynical, but hard to argue with. As a species, we are not just superficial, we are deeply structurally unfair.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
So this leaves us in a very difficult position. If the media ecosystem, Our evolutionary biology, our educational systems, and our entire societal reward structure are all actively conspiring to keep us completely blind to the true, chaotic nature of reality.
Yeah, what do we do?
How on earth do you communicate this truth? How do you explain the unexplainable to a species that refuses to see it? Ironically, the method chosen to communicate all of this is, well, a story.
Yes, and it's a massive, glaring contradiction, which is openly acknowledged. The philosopher Edna Ullmann Margalit actually pointed this exact paradox out.
What did she say?
She pointed out that if human beings suffer from the narrative fallacy, our dangerous tendency to compress complex reality into neat little stories, then using a highly evocative metaphor like the Black Swan to describe the vast, abstract, imprecise nature of the unknown is, itself, a dangerous compression.
You are taking the infinite chaos of the universe and putting a neat, catchy label on it. You are turning the unknown into a recognizable character.
Exactly. You're using the very flaw you're critiquing.
But instead of backing down, the argument leans directly into the contradiction. The reasoning is brilliantly pragmatic. You need a story to displace a story. Ideas, statistics, and raw data come and go, but stories stick in our evolutionary hardware.
Metaphors are vastly more potent than pure philosophical concepts.
If you are going to go to war against the entrenched narrative disciplines, the economic forecasters, the sociologists, the talking heads on television, you can't beat them with a spreadsheet. Your only viable weapon is a superior, stickier narrative.
And that pragmatic approach dictates the entire format of how these ideas are presented. This isn't intended to be a dry, peer-reviewed scientific paper.
It's framed as an essay, an impulsive, aggressive meditation.
There is a deep, abiding scorn for what is referred to as sterile skepticism.
Sterile skepticism.
That is the kind of theoretical, useless doubt you find debated endlessly in university philosophy departments.
Right, the academics who sit around reading Wittgenstein, intensely arguing over linguistic puzzles, debating whether a black swan can technically even be classified as a swan if the property of whiteness is essential to the definition of the bird.
It's intellectual masturbation.
The argument here is essentially, we can leave those word games for the weekend. The real world doesn't care about your definitions.
Because the people debating semantics in a climate-controlled classroom have never faced true skin-in-the-game situations of decision-making under extreme uncertainty.
They don't actually know what's important because their survival is never dependent on it.
Exactly. The true bleeding-edge practice of uncertainty isn't found in a university lecture hall. It's found out in the wild.
Where do we find it?
It's found in piracy, in high-stakes commodity speculation, in professional gambling, in the operations of the mafia, or in the trenches of serial entrepreneurship.
Those are the arenas where people actually live and die by their ability to navigate the unknown. That is where messy reality violently hits the platonic fold.
And because of this aggressively practical stance, there is a strict refusal to rely on what is called naive empiricism.
I really want to unpack this, because it's how most of us are taught to win an argument. The standard approach is to provide a beastly overload of selective data, charts, and corroborating evidence to prove your point. Why is that considered naive?
Let me give you an analogy for naive empiricism. Imagine you decide you are a genius stock market investor. To prove it to me, you show me the portfolio of the 3 tech stocks you bought last year that went up 200%.
Okay, look at me, I'm a genius.
Right. But what you deliberately don't show me are the 50 other stocks you bought that went completely bankrupt. You are cherry-picking the specific empirical evidence that confirms your pre-existing narrative while burying the evidence that contradicts it.
It's confirmation bias weaponized by data.
Exactly. Anyone who is actively looking for confirmation can easily dig up enough historical anecdotes or statistical blips to deceive themselves and everyone around them. You can always find a brilliant quote by some dead authority figure to perfectly back up your thesis, and I can go to the library and find another quote from a different dead thinker that says the exact opposite.
Right, statistics can be manipulated to say anything.
Anecdotes that are deliberately selected to fit a narrative do not constitute actual scientific evidence. The core concept of the Black Swan isn't based on cherry-picked historical trivia. It is based on the fundamental mathematical structure of randomness and asymmetry in our empirical reality.
Which brings us to the ultimate mind-bending paradox of this entire exploration. I want everyone listening to really pause and chew on this claim.
It's a big one.
The argument is that despite all of our incredible technological progress, despite the massive, unprecedented growth in our collective human knowledge, the supercomputers, the data centers, or perhaps exactly because of all that progress, the future is going to become increasingly less predictable.
It is a deeply unsettling, counterintuitive thought.
We have been conditioned since the Enlightenment to assume that progress automatically equals control.
We fundamentally believe that more data, more sensors, and more processing power will inevitably lead to clearer, better forecasts.
But the argument here flips that entirely. Human nature, biological arrogance, and the vested interests of social science are all conspiring to hide the truth from us. The sheer interconnected complexity of our modern world is drastically outpacing our technological ability to model it.
It's out of control.
When you connect 8 billion people to the internet, when global supply chains are intertwined so tightly that a single stuck boat in the Suez Canal can crash economies across the globe, you aren't reducing chaos.
No, you are actively manufacturing it. You are creating a breeding ground for extreme outliers.
Exactly. More connectivity doesn't mean more stability. It means that when a shock happens, it spreads instantly and globally. We haven't eliminated the Black Swan. We've just built a massive, highly conductive planetary grid for it to travel along.
It's a terrifying reality.
So we've covered a massive amount of conceptual ground today. We started by looking at a strange bird in Australia, and we ended up systematically deconstructing the fundamental validity of human expertise and our ability to perceive reality.
A pretty deep dive, I'd say.
If we accept the premise we've explored today, that our world is violently driven by rare, extreme events, that our highly paid experts are completely blind to them, relying on the intellectual fraud of the bell curve, that our evolutionary biology forces us to prefer neat, false maps over messy, true realities, and that society unjustly punishes the silent heroes of prevention while rewarding the visible empty suits.
So what does this all mean?
How do we actually walk away from this?
Yeah, how do you and I live in a world governed by chaos? What is the practical takeaway?
I think the underlying message provides a very clear, if highly unconventional, mandate for how to operate. First, we have to fundamentally restructure our worldview. We have to stop treating the extreme event as a weird anomaly to be smoothed out and pushed under the rug of the bell curve.
Stop pretending the outlier doesn't exist.
Exactly. We have to use the extreme event as our starting point. We have to base our strategies on our anti-knowledge, on our deep respect for what we do not and cannot know. We have to shift from trying to predict the future to aggressively tinkering in the present. We have to maximize our personal and professional exposure to positive serendipity.
Yes, engage in constant trial and error.
So we are positioned to catch the positive black swans when they fly by. And simultaneously, we have to protect ourselves against the devastating, unpredictable downsides. We have to stop pretending we can see the storm coming on the radar, and instead focus purely on building ships that are robust enough to survive the waves we can't see.
Build a stronger ship. And that leads perfectly to a final thought I want to leave everyone with.
Okay, let's hear it.
It's something to deeply mull over, building directly on the warnings about our rapidly shifting modern environment. There is a specific note in the material that describes our current world as highly recursive.
Recursive, what does that mean in this context?
What that means is that we have built these incredibly fast-flowing, planet-wide information networks. And these networks create massive, winner-take-all feedback loops. Events don't just happen in isolation anymore. Events happen because other events happen.
Oh, like a chain reaction.
Exactly. A minor fluctuation in a market in Asia triggers an algorithmic trading cascade in New York, which causes a political crisis in Europe, which goes viral on social media.
It's an environment of instant, uncontrollable, compounding chain reactions. A far cry from the simple, slow-moving reality of the Pleistocene era where our brains evolved.
Precisely. And here is the terrifying question.
Yeah.
If our brains evolved specifically to survive the simple, slow-moving, linear dangers of the ancient world, and this new, hyper-connected digital reality is aggressively accelerating both the frequency and the devastating impact of black swans, what happens to us?
What happens when a biologically ancient, narrative-addicted brain is forced to live in a reality where the extreme is no longer an outlier, but an everyday occurrence?
How will our minds and our societies adapt when the very concept of normal collapses completely?
It really makes you wonder. The next time you look at a 5-year economic forecast, or read the daily political news, or listen to a perfectly coiffed expert on television, painting a crystal clear mathematical picture of exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, ask yourself, are you actually looking at reality, or are you just staring at a jagged white line on a broken X-ray machine, desperately hoping the doctor tells you a story that makes you feel safe?
It's a lot to think about.
It is. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the map. We'll catch you next time.